Lacking a quorum. Let some folks be heard. Since we're not taking action yet, I've got a couple other members that are on the way. I want everybody to be very respectful of time today. We've got thought we had the room for 2 hours and I was going to be able to get in great detail. And because everybody's trying to get bills out of the Senate before crossover day, we're under a pretty tight schedule. We have to be out of committee by next Wednesday afternoon in order to get on our calendar for day 28. So everybody's getting meetings, extra meetings scheduled so they can move legislation. So we're going to try to be snappy, and I ask you all to be respectful of each other. Then we have several speakers that are from out of town, have made great efforts to come today. And we have a couple by Zoom because they couldn't get here due to weather problems, et cetera. So that's why we got the screens lit up and ready to go, and we'll see. I think you'll be enlightened by it. On our notice for the meeting today, we put a reference that the focus on this meeting would be problem gambling, compulsive gambling, gambling addictions, and ways to prevent and to treat that. I am striving very hard that this legislation would be pretty much cutting edge and would be kind of a state of the art for the nation, a model for the nation to follow is how to prevent problem gaming and to treat it if we do have incidents of that arise through the sports betting process. So I won't call everybody exactly in order. I've had a couple of people that have asked to speak and to shorten their time. I'm going to ask you to try to keep it to just a couple of minutes, and I'm going to run through a few of these first, and then we'll get into a couple of people by phone. I'll go ahead and call you Mike Griffith if you want to talk to us and your views on either the constitutional amendment or the enabling legislation. They're both in our folders today.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mike Griffin. I'm the Public Affairs Representative with the Georgia Baptist Mission Board. He's handing out a resolution that was passed by Georgia Baptist in 22 on opposing sports gambling. And so you've got that there. Being that we're talking primarily about the issues related to problem gambling and addiction, and I'll just say, and the professor and Les will do a better job of going into more of those details. But just in my studying and looking at some of the material that Professor Kent has, when you look at gambling overall, 69 to 90% of the revenue that comes into the gambling industry comes from problem and addicted gamblers. And problem meaning those that are on the road to becoming addicted to those that already do have some mental issues related to that. And when you look at the actual data on how many problem gamblers or how many addicted gamblers, the addicted is very, very small. I mean, it may be only 4 to 7%, but when you look at problem gambling in all, in some cases, it may be as high as 25%. But the point of the matter is that 75% or more don't have a problem. But the revenue is coming from the 69 to 90% of the revenue comes from the problem and addicted gambling. So when you say we're going to put in all these guardrails to make sure we don't have a problem, well, if they are successful, which typically they're not in the nature of what we're dealing with here, but let's just give it a perfect world, then you would shut down 69 to 90% of the revenue that many people are bragging about is going to come into the state. Bottom line is, if we legalize gambling in our state or expand it in this fashion, it's going to be putting gasoline on a fire that we already have, making the addiction and the other issues even worse. And so that's just something I just want to refer to today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much for being with us. And your position's been well noted over the years, and we appreciate you continuing to share it with us.
And thank you for your willingness to hear all the positions. Thank you.
Paul, if you could also keep it to a couple minutes. We've heard from you often before and always good to see you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate the open debate. I will be brief, partly because I have given plenty of testimony in this committee before, but also to reserve some time for Mr. Bernal. We do represent churches and other Christian ministries across Georgia. I don't have an accurate number of that, but a couple of weeks ago on February 7th, we had about 100 pastors and other faith leaders come to the Capitol for our Citizen Impact Day. So I think you can agree that's a fraction of those that we overall represent. We want to comment on the argument that the benefit of doing sports betting is that so much illegal sports betting is already taking place, and Georgia would benefit from regulating and taxing it. But I would encourage the members to look at the source of the information on the size and scope of illegal gambling, because those numbers usually come from the gambling industry, who obviously have a very much an interest in it. For whatever reason, GBI or the FBI does not see that this is such a widespread problem that they're investigating or providing numbers on the amount of illegal gambling, but that might be helpful to get it from a more neutral source. I also learned from Les Bernal's website, Stop Predatory Gambling, that no American jurisdiction has done a study after they've legalized gambling to see if there's a reduction in illegal gambling. So if that's the argument, it would seem wise to have some sort of numbers on that legal gambling reduces illegal gambling. And then finally, I would just say that with state-sponsored gambling, and I'm saying that in the distinction between, an office pool on the Super Bowl or a Friday night poker game, state-sponsored gambling that tends to be predatory in nature will result in more addictions, more bankruptcies, more broken homes. And those pastors who I represent all across Georgia will be dealing with much of that fallout. So thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being with us. Miss Natalie Crawford from Georgia First.
Thank you, Senators and Chairman. Again, I'm Natalie Crawford with Georgia First. We're 501c4 here in Georgia. We want to applaud you for this bill. Georgia First supports the constitutional amendment. Bringing this to the people of Georgia for a decision, I think, is the most appropriate approach. We appreciate also the innovative problem gambling provisions that are included in the bill and wholeheartedly believe this is a critical element in this legislation. It's a responsible and thoughtful inclusion. So we applaud you for that as well. We believe that this body has an opportunity to make a real difference in an area that is a stated priority of both chambers, and that's literacy. Georgia consistently ranks in the bottom 10 for literacy across the country. And as was once said in these great halls, as goes education, so goes the state. We've consistently heard in committees this session, and science tells us that the foundation of literacy begins at birth, and 90% of our brain development occurs prior to age 5. And that's why we'd ask you to consider dedicating revenues generated by sports wagering to DECAL's Children and Parents Scholarship Program to equip our children for the future and ensure a more literate workforce. CAPS provides early childhood education to Georgia's children with limited resources, our most needy, but I would wager by no means our least promising. Committing the funds to education can ensure that hope remains whole, pre-K can be expanded, and we can ensure that we maintain and grow the CAPS scholarship program addressing the literacy concerns where it matters most. I'll leave you with this. 33% of our children are reading on grade level and proficiently by the end of 3rd grade. And that's an important distinction when you're talking about literacy rates, on grade level and proficiently. And of the 67% who don't meet that milestone, we only recover 22% of them by graduation. I won't share further statistics with you, but we are happy to take questions or meet with you all offline to share further information, and we'll take any questions that you have.
Would you just tell us briefly about the DECAL program?
Absolutely. So the CAPS program, the Children and Parents Program, provides scholarships for early childcare, children ages 0 to 3. And I'll share with you that that program is facing on two fronts a fairly significant reduction in the number of children they can serve and in funding, because we used during the pandemic ARPA dollars to create the Access program. We were able to serve more children and at a higher scholarship level by creating the Access program and using those ARPA dollars. We went from around 50,000 children to 60,000 under Access.
Okay. So basically you would want to change the formula, the division or direction of the funds in the constitutional amendment to include some percentage for that early childhood education. I'll call it, just as a kind of a catch-all.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, absolutely.
Do you have a suggestion as to what you think an appropriate percentage would be? This is, kind of a push and pull from different interests, trying to find the right way to spend the proceeds of this.
Well, in our estimation, we would love to see the provision for problem gambling remain. But in terms of making a real impact in any one specific area, we think that the balance should be directed to education and probably the greatest percentage of that to CAPS.
Okay.
Again, addressing our literacy issue where it matters most. But we would be very happy to work with this committee and with you, Mr. Chairman, on a percentage that makes sense.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you being with us today. Mac Parnell. While he's coming up, I'll just refresh people. This constitutional amendment provides for the directed expenditures of several different categories. 50% would be dedicated to needs-based scholarships, grants, and loans to Georgia citizens to go either to technical school programs or private colleges and universities or University System of Georgia schools. Would be needs-based rather than the merit-based Hope Scholarship Program. 25% is dedicated to healthcare, mental health, economic development, and reduction of poverty in our rural areas and our high poverty areas of the state. 15% to public health and educational programs and services to prevent people from experiencing problem gaming, compulsive gambling problems, and provide assistance and treatment for those. 5% to advancement of sports in the states, which includes the cost and expenses of soliciting and promoting and sponsoring regional, national, and international sporting events. And then 5% to other innovational educational programs and services. So one of the advantages of the constitutional amendment is that you can direct spending from the proceeds. I don't believe you can do that other than very narrow exceptions without a constitutional amendment. All right, Mr. Parnell.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Mac Parnell. I'm the Executive Director of the Georgia Faith and Freedom Coalition. Thank you so much for having this important hearing, and thank you to you, Mr. Chairman, for the specific approach of going about this as a constitutional amendment, which I think the debate should be had at that level. So thank you so much for that focus. Georgia is the #1 state to do business with record revenues. Our state is doing great. This, in our view, this is unnecessary for our state to continue to succeed. And one, I'll just be very brief. One argument that I hear quite frequently in favor of this legislation is, well, it's already happening in our state, so we might as well get the revenue from it. I would say there are a lot of things that are happening in our state, but that doesn't mean the state should embrace it. And I'll give you one example, fentanyl, for example. That doesn't, just because that's happening in our state and devastating communities, doesn't mean the state should embrace it. But thank you so much for your time. I'll leave the stats and the numbers to our later speakers, but the Georgia Faith and Freedom stands opposed to this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, let's see if we can arrange here to have Jim Whelan. He is going to join us by Zoom. What do we need to do? Jim, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you just fine. Would you please introduce yourself to the committee? Tell us who you are, who you're employed by, and then give us your thoughts on Senate Resolution 140, which is our constitutional amendment, and Senate Bill 172, which is the sports betting enabling legislation.
Certainly, thank you.
Where's yours?
So my name is Dr. Jim Whalen. I am a professor at the University of Memphis and a professor in psychology at the University of Memphis. I'm also the executive director for the Institute of Gambling Education and Research. I've been both doing research as well as operating treatment clinics for those who have gambling harm since the late 1990s. And I wanted to speak today to just applaud both making a financial commitment and to including in these actions efforts to manage harms related to gambling. I think that the idea of stopping gambling is like putting up a fence after everything's left the yard. But instead, what everyone should do, and I applaud both your legislative body and encourage your regulators to fully embrace the model of how we move policy and public health practices to initiate efforts to reduce harms, prevent them, address the needs of subpopulations that may be harmed, and to provide a safety net or services in order to decrease the incidence and prevalence. There are lots of people who get worried, and I fully understand why, with all of the advertising, et cetera, that happens in jurisdictions that have legalized sports wagering the last few years. The evidence of 30-some years of prevalence data shows that what likely will happen is this: there'll be more people coming forward with a gambling problem initially, but that culturally things adjust, and that harm will be, the evident harm will be reduced. I don't say that to say that people being harmed is not something to pay attention to, but also something to say that instead to say that what's included in this bill, from my perspective, is an engagement in taking those steps that are necessary to address those harms, both with the attending to what are the rules and regulations, but I also want to encourage both the legislative group and whatever regulatory body gets involved to very closely consider placing expectations that build a partnership with gaming operators to provide the very best and responsible gaming to the citizens of Georgia. Tennessee as well.
Thank you. You have provided the members, it's in our folders, with a written statement or opinion piece there that we'll all have an opportunity to read here. Do any members have questions for Dr. Whelan? All right, thank you for being with us. And if you don't mind, stand by. We may call you back if anything comes up after other testimony to hear your expert views on.
Certainly. Thank you.
All right. Let's see if we can get Mark Vander Linden on from the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. I don't believe Mark's live. I think he's also by phone. There we go. Mark, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you perfectly fine. Thank you, Chairman and
You have
committee
your
members.
Audio and video. So go ahead and introduce yourself and give us your thoughts on our legislation. And I'm particularly interested to hear how Massachusetts is handling problem gaming. I have visited properties up there and was impressed with some of the more aggressive actions that your state is taking on problem gaming. So help tell us how you handle it there and what your views of this legislation are. I think you've had an opportunity to review it. What are we getting right? What are we getting better? How can we further improve these guardrails?
Great. Yeah, I'd be happy to comment on that. Before I begin, again, my name is Mark Vander Linden. I'm the Director of Research and Responsible Gaming at the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. And I've been in this role for the past 10 years, basically since the commission began its work before the casinos opened in 2015. Before that, I worked in public health at the Iowa Department of Public Health, and I oversaw problem gambling treatment, prevention, and workforce development. And so today I will speak on behalf of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission that's responsible for overseeing licensing, regulating casinos, and as of January 31st, sports wagering in the state. So we have 2 resort style casinos, 1 slot parlor, and 11 sports wagering licensees in Massachusetts right now. I will comment on the legislation. I think that there's a lot that is right about that legislation. I think that a focus on a gaming commission. I think that dedicated funding for public health that specifically targets problem gambling or gambling related issues is spot on. And I would compare that to how Massachusetts approached it back in with the 2011 Expanded Gaming Act, where it created a public health trust fund, which is a percentage of gross gaming revenue, as well as a flat out assessment on gaming licensees to create a dedicated and protected fund to address gambling related issues. It also, and where I may suggest this committee consider, is an emphasis in the area of research. One of your previous speakers talked about a lack of research, and to understand both the issue as well as the impact of the proposed legislation. And I think that is right. I think that it's important for the state of Georgia to understand the nature of the impacts, both positive and negative, social and economic and public safety, so that as you consider how best to use such public health funds, you can be more strategic, you can be more precise in your approach. I would also encourage the committee to really distinguish responsible gaming and problem gambling, which was a lesson that I learned early on with the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. Addressing problem gambling, making sure that there is a treatment system that is available, easily accessible for residents, is absolutely important. Also, looking at responsible gaming, which is basically prevention of problem gambling, is equally important in my mind. And Senator, when you visited Massachusetts, I think you saw a great example of a casino-based problem gambling prevention program in GameSense, and I'll speak to that in just a minute. But one thing I would like to say is that there is a lot of talk about problem gambling, the prevalence of problem gambling. But in one of our research studies in Massachusetts, it's important to understand that gambling is on a continuum. You may have a small percentage of individuals that would be considered diagnosed with a gambling disorder or problem gambling. You would have a much larger percentage of individuals that are in between, exhibiting some risky form of gambling. And the reality is that you have people moving back and forth along this continuum. Recreational gamblers becoming problem gamblers becoming recreational gamblers. And so you can't, it isn't stagnant. And it's important that as you consider your response, that you recognize that people move around on this continuum, and the public health approach is structures programs to support that.
Well, that's encouraging. And if a person begins to exhibit signs of problem gaming, that they can reel that in and get it under control before they become addicted.
That is exactly right. If you recognize sort of what are the what causes problem gambling, so what are the antecedents and what is happening in the individual's life, you can begin to structure programs, provide information, provide resources that would perhaps prevent them from moving from that at-risk to problem gambler, and perhaps even more importantly, move those at-risk gamblers down that continuum towards recreational gamblers, or in other words, reduce the amount of harm that is being experienced. Never forget that problem gamblers will be there, and that the treatment needs to be available, but also recognize that great efforts can be made to prevent the individuals from moving down that continuum as well. In Massachusetts, Senator, you mentioned you had a chance to visit one of our casinos, Encore Boston Harbor, and you saw the GameSense program at work. The Massachusetts law required that each casino provide an on-site space for a substance abuse, compulsive gambling, and mental health counseling provider to be determined by the commission. That was an early task of mine to figure out how to maximize that space. We didn't want it to be a far off office in a casino. We wanted it to have broad appeal and reach as many individuals as possible. In fact, all individuals on that continuum of gambling behavior, including those recreational gamblers, so we could provide them with information so they can make an informed choice about their gambling. The GameSense program at each casino, if you think about a storefront where we have trained GameSense advisors, they understand problem gambling, but they also understand the importance of educating gamblers in order to help them make healthier decisions about their gambling behavior. Each casino has one of these GameSense information centers. They're staffed 16 to 24 hours a day. And while you're talking about sports wagering, I do want to emphasize, I think we are adapting the GameSense program to sports wagering, mobile sports wagering, as well as casino sports books within each of the casinos, with the same objective. How do you provide the right information to the right individuals at the right time? Not all gamblers are the same. A recreational gambler perhaps needs a different type of information than somebody who may be exhibiting risky gambling behavior, where you need to be more targeted and precise in the type of information and resources that you provide.
Could you explain just briefly to our committee how you are able to track people's play to see when they're exhibiting signs of problem gaming and how you intervene to put the brakes on?
It's an art and a science. Our GameSense advisors at each of these casinos, they aren't there during Problem Gambling Awareness Month and for a limited amount of time. They are there every day, 7 days a week. The individuals that come to the casino on a regular basis, sometimes on a daily basis or even more than a daily basis, GameSense advisors look for opportunities to connect with individuals. And perhaps the conversation starts off very casually, but eventually it begins to be more targeted about responsible gaming and what that looks like. And eventually it may end up being more about how gambling is impacting their life and providing them with information and resources to move away from the casino, including a voluntary self-exclusion program. In sports wagering, there are better ways to track individuals' gambling behavior because it's all logged. And I think that there are plenty of opportunities in order to identify risky gambling behavior and provide interventions from that mobile platform. And again, we are new, Massachusetts is new in this space. These are some of the ways in which I would look for the GameSense program to begin working with gamblers that are on mobile gaming platforms.
Okay. We'll give you about a minute to wrap up and just stand by. We may call you back, but I have a couple other speakers I want to make sure get to be heard today. Any final thoughts for us?
Yeah, so I think you are right on, and I applaud your efforts to become a model in this space. You are a latecomer in some ways to this, and much like Massachusetts was, that's a perfect place to be to make the right decisions, to recognize where other states may have fallen down and made mistakes, and to do this right. Gambling-related harms are a central concern of many lawmakers in your exact position and have been over time when you're thinking about gambling expansion. Creating designated and protected funding pathways to support the development and maintenance of a comprehensive public health approach should be given serious commission by the committee. It should recognize that you need a treatment system. It should recognize that responsible gaming is a powerful tool to prevent problem gambling. And you should also recognize the need for dedicated research dollars to understand the effects of gambling in your state. Thank you. I appreciate the chance to provide some testimony.
Thank you very much. And if you don't mind standing by in case we need to call you again, I have your contact information and may follow up as we finalize any legislation before final votes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We'll call Mr. David Rayner. David, I see you're here. Everybody in the committee, if you look in your folders, there is a letter from the Georgia Chamber of Commerce in support of this constitutional amendment, and I'll let Mr. Rayner speak to us briefly, and we'll get back to another problem gaming speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Rayner with the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. Appreciate and commend you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing Senate Resolution 140 to this committee and before the legislature. We are in fact supportive of SR 140. As the chairman mentioned, there is a letter of support in your folders I'll draw your attention to. Overall, the chamber supports a wagering ecosystem here in Georgia that promotes economic development, workforce development, tourism, and additional educational opportunities in the form of needs-based scholarships. So we also appreciate the chairman's focus today and the committee's focus around addressing wagering-related addiction, as well as problematic and compulsive gambling. So just commend the resolution to your favorable consideration. Appreciate the time.
Thank you so much for being with us. Ms. Brianne Dura. A surprise guest that appeared on the rope line today, had heard about our proceedings and has been tracking gaming developments nationwide. If you would please introduce yourself, and if you could try to contain your comments to, 7 or 8 minutes. I've got 2 more speakers and the clock is ticking, but we're glad to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Brianne Dora-Shawal, and I'm with the National Council on Problem Gambling. As the senator mentioned, I've been involved in almost every jurisdiction that has legalized sports wagering since the overturning of PASPA in 2018, and I'd be happy to answer any and all questions that you may have. As I mentioned, I'm here on behalf of NCPG, which is the sole national advocate for problem gamblers and their loved ones. Our mission is to lead state and national stakeholders in the development of comprehensive policy and programs for all of those affected by problem gambling. So what is problem gambling? We've heard that talked about quite a bit today, right? It's any behaviors that compromise, disrupt, damage personal, family, or vocational pursuits. And it's to be understood that for every one individual that's struggling with problematic gambling, it negatively impacts 8 to 10 other individuals. There's an estimated 7 million Americans that are actively struggling with problem gambling, with an estimated 115,854 Georgia adults. And in 2021, the NCPG National Helpline received 6,063 calls, texts, and chats from Georgia residents seeking help. That's a 35% increase from 2019 to 2021. We also know very clearly from research that anytime there's an introduction of a new form of gambling, albeit iGaming, casinos, sports wagering, there too will simultaneously be an increase in the number of problems. And just yesterday, the headline stated that Ohio, which has been live since January 1st with sports wagering, has seen a tripling in their helpline numbers. Now, while some of this data and statistics can be quite alarming, I'm here to assure you that there are steps that can be taken to ultimately minimize and reduce the harm that already exists and will increase if you were to legalize sports wagering. Right now, Georgia's per capita investment in problem gambling is 4 cents. The average is 40 cents. You rank 35th out of the 42 jurisdictions that do anything about this. This proposed bill would significantly increase your contributions. With a 15% contribution of the tax revenue, you will quickly be elevated to one of the largest contributors to problem gambling services. And the people of Georgia deserve it. Those that are currently struggling and those that will struggle in the future. Additionally, I would like to applaud you for these efforts, as there are several bills that are being discussed in both chambers around the legalization of sports wagering. It is quite contradictory to say that your bill is responsible and addressing problem gambling adequately if funding is absent. Your bill, sir, is the only one with any funding mechanism to appropriately address this important public health issue. A best practice, however, in problem gambling services is to also have recovery services and research incorporated into that funding. As Mark Vanderlinden in Massachusetts pointed out, it can be vital as a way to evolve and innovate policy. There are 2 states, Massachusetts and New Jersey, that have annual research agendas that policymakers like yourself can use to inform their decisions on how to better protect their constituents. Additionally, since the Supreme Court struck down PASPA in 2018, we've seen some worrisome trends. In fact, in our Engage survey, the percentage of gamblers who answered many times when asked if they relied on others to pay their debts in the last year tripled. And those that answered many times when asked if they had lied to hide their gambling doubled in the same period, from 3 to 6%. That survey found that sports bettors tend to be younger, more impressionable than other bettors, and they show a likelihood of engaging in problematic play at 2 to 3 times the rate of other gamblers. Having comprehensive policies like the ones that you've proposed today, both from a responsible gaming aspect, as Mark Vanderlinden pointed out, ways that you're trying to prevent problematic gambling, that are mirrored with adequate treatment and recovery services to those that may find themselves struggling, is the only way to go about legalizing something like sports wagering. We truly applaud your innovation and your aggressive pursuits in addressing this. What you'll hear when you talk about sports wagering is the importance of data. Data. It drives this industry. Well, we agree. We think from the problem gambling side, data and research should also drive the way we prevent and we address handling this public health issue. Truthfully, it's an economic and ethical imperative that you were to pursue the legalization of sports wagering. You are also adequately pursuing the addressing of problem gambling.
You have any thoughts about the cap on deposits that this bill limits a gambler to no more than $2,000 per month? That number in related to Georgia is, of course, 24,000 a year is about 50% of the median annual income.
Sure.
That's where I came up with it, but I don't know whether that's high, whether that's low, whether that's a unique approach or what your thoughts on that are.
Well, it's absolutely a unique approach. It's a first of a kind policy that we've seen proposed through sports wagering legalization. There's some research that exists abroad that suggests that about 3% of an individual's discretionary income that goes towards gambling is kind of the safe spot. So I think if we were to look at what is the relation between the median income as well as what you've proposed and accounting for what is someone's discretionary income, I would like to see research really assessing and evaluating its efficacy and curbing problematic behaviors. I think the crux of it really comes down to informed decision-making and helping people understand what is affordable for them and their lifestyle and keeping their engagement in a healthy way.
Thank you for being with us today. I've got just another quick speaker here.
Yeah, thank you.
And if you'll stand by, just in case we had questions. Les Bernal, Stop Predatory Gambling.
I need a clicker for some slides.
Let's see if we can help you out there. That's correct. What time you have? Quarter it is. What we're gonna do with all the extra time?
And could I trouble you to, when you get a minute, to load my presentation, please? Thank you. There you go. Thank you. Mr. Chair, you,
Go ahead if you're ready.
okay, I'm ready. Thank you, committee, for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Les Burnell, and I'm the National Director for Stop Predatory Gambling, which is a national advocacy group based in Washington, D.C. We're involved in all 50 states. We pull from citizens of all political stripes and from, in all walks of life, and who make up our national network. I personally am from Massachusetts. I'm from Lawrence, Massachusetts, which is the poorest city in the state. So I'm very familiar with the Massachusetts Gambling Commission. It's a community where I live, where just like here in Georgia, they sell $50 scratch tickets on every street corner in the poorest community in the state. And I also want to clarify where we get our funding from, because the problem gambling councils in our country, particularly the National Council on Problem Gambling, unfortunately, at this point, receives the bulk of their funding from the gambling industry. And we're hoping in the years ahead that's going to change. But so when you hear Problem Gambling Council speak, their funding is almost directly derived from the gambling industry. So I have 5 quick facts I'm going to share with you all today. But before I do so, I want to say this is we saw a homepage of our website for Stop Predatory Gambling in the first slide. This is the homepage for our campaign, the Campaign for Gambling Free Kids. When this is over, I encourage all of you to check out our websites to learn more. So the first fact I'm going to talk about today, and this is pretty simple. I mean, this is the science talking, and we don't really talk about the science here yet. The science has shown us that online gambling is a dangerous and addictive product. And this isn't me saying this. This is the American Psychiatric Association and the DSM-5, which is known as a mental health Bible. Health insurers use it. Doctors' offices use it. They identify gambling addiction as an addiction, like they identify cocaine, opioids, and heroin. So this is far different than, this is not some innocuous, casual gambling that occurs between two people as friends. This is a highly addictive product. And you can just read the language there directly from the DSM at the bottom of that slide, which I won't read to. You can read that on your own. So we talk about a lot about responsible gambling today. You hear state officials from my own state of Massachusetts and across the country talk about quote unquote responsible gambling. Well, that's an industry term. Okay, responsible gambling. If it really was effective, okay, let's look at the non-alcoholic industry, all the companies that sell non-alcoholic drinks, you got whiskey, vodka, wine, and beer, and so on. You would think if so-called responsible gambling was real and effective, it was actually genuinely important to helping people, you would think there'd be a market for a gambling operator to fill that space. But there's 0 gambling operators in this country and in the world that call themselves we're the responsible gambling operators. And there's a reason for that. Okay, there's a reason for that. The business model, as we've heard earlier, and you'll hear over again, the business model is based on the addictive gambler. They don't have a business model without it. Okay, and here are the facts on that. Very quickly, there's at least 9 independent studies. This is right from the Atlantic, which is the most respected national opinion leader magazines. A big story they did on casinos a few years ago. At least 9 independent studies, I mean, they're not funded by the gambling industry, shows that the addicted gambler makes up, up to 60% of their profits. And then the question I'd love to ask, and I urge the committee, you have Mark Van Erlinen from the Massachusetts Gambling Commission, who's the responsible gambling point person. Let's ask the question: how much money? We have all these gambling lobbyists in the room today. How much money does the gambling industry make from citizens who practice so-called responsible gambling codes of conduct? It's almost negligible. That's the Natasha Schull, who's the #1 researcher in the country on gambling technology and so on. She's now at NYU, wrote the landmark book, Addiction by Design. Said that she had a study in that book where 75% of the players walking in the casino were so-called casual players. They made up 4% of gambling profits. So as well as intended as you are to put 15% into problem gambling, they don't have a business model. The business model is based on the out-of-control player. 90% of citizens who are addicted to gambling, they never even come forward for help. So you're just touching the tip of the iceberg. So the fact number 2 on this, and this is the demographic that's going to pay the biggest price here in Georgia. Kids used to grow up following sports. Myself, when I was growing up, Dale Murphy was a huge superstar in baseball. One of my favorite. That's an actual baseball card from Dale Murphy, 1979. Kids used to collect baseball cards. Now in our country today, in playgrounds, in states where they've legalized this, playgrounds, in locker rooms, They're talking about their parlay bets. You know, who's gonna, they're in play wagering, all this type of stuff that's happening in our schools. Call any middle school principal in a state that's legalized this and ask them, are you seeing a gambling problem amongst middle schoolers? You know, this is real. Okay, this is real. Kids, it's being normalized for kids. It's the advertising that's driving it. Okay, there's some good facts in there about how gambling advertising normalizes gambling for kids. You know, today you're not a sports fan anymore unless you have money on the game. You know, I was a high school men's basketball coach, a college men's basketball coach. The idea, like, you play sports for the drama and the competition. You know, now it's about the gambling. That's new in America. Okay, and we talk about, you know, the lobbyists will stand up and say, we're going to protect the kids. We'll protect the kids from this product. You know, if you legalize online sports, again, we're going to protect them. Let's look at how the state government here in Georgia protects kids currently from the lottery. Okay, this is from the lottery website. Is last time I sit in my hotel room. That's 5 screenshots I took. Look, 4 of them of different games. Those are cartoon-like figures. They're free-to-play games. They have this whole product called DigiGames, so you can go on and play online. That's how we're regulating, quotes, I put that in quotes, regulating gambling today in Georgia to protect kids. You know, cats and dogs, little ladybugs. And on that screen to the right, if you go to the website at the lottery and put your mouse over it, you get a buy now or try. It's free to play. You know, there's no age restriction. You can have a 10-year-old kid go on that lottery website and play these games. They look like cartoon games. Who do you think the lottery is targeting with those games? Let's be honest. Who are they going after? They're normalizing gambling for the kids of Georgia. So the idea that somehow you're going to protect kids from online sports gambling if you bring it in, with all due respect, we're not seeing it now with the Georgia lottery. So the fact number 3, commercialized gambling exploits the little guy. Okay, and there's an amazing amount of facts up there, and I released this. It was a handout we sent to all of you as well prior to the hearing. But just real briefly, like, let's look how much money people are already losing in Georgia to the Georgia lottery without even bringing in new forms of gambling. In the last year, $2.2 billion of personal wealth was lost by the people of Georgia, okay, who are disproportionately low-income people playing out the lottery. $2.2 billion of wealth lost. That's $4,200 every minute. So if I speak for 10 minutes today, okay, that's 40 grand that's going to be lost by the people of Georgia. Okay, 40 grand. In the last 20 years, since FY 2000, the people of Georgia have lost $36 billion of personal wealth to commercialized gambling. Unbelievable. $36 billion. So if the state does nothing, if you don't add in new forms of gambling here in the state, over the next 5 years, the state citizens are going to lose $11 billion of wealth to gambling. Okay. How much is enough? How much is enough for Georgia state officials do they want their citizens to lose? What's that magic number? You know, is $36 billion not enough? And here's one of my favorite facts to show. Because when Dracula is in charge of the blood bank, you got a $50 scratch ticket selling in states with people who make a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. You have to work a full day labor at a minimum wage job before you can lose it in 5 seconds on a $50 scratch ticket. So who's regulating that to protect the public? Was that what we haven't intended? $50 scratch tickets in low-income communities across the state? Fact number 4, the big con. Why commercialized gambling is different than every other business, okay? There's this assumption that gambling is just like going to Starbucks or going to the movies or anything else. What makes commercialized gambling different than every other business, and the reason why your forefathers in this state had a constitutional amendment process to deal with gambling is because it's inherently a form of financial fraud. It's a big con, okay? If you go and order a slice of pizza, you go to order a beer, a glass of wine, you go to a Falcons game, that's what you receive in return. Commercialized gambling is a financial exchange that is mathematically stacked against you. It gives you the lure that you might win money. Okay, but it's the more you participate in it at higher and higher price points, you're going to end up losing all your cash. Okay, it's a con. It's just like price gouging and false advertising, both of which are illegal in Georgia, as is. You and I can't run our own lottery. We can't run our own online game operator, and that stuff because it's illegal, because it's a form of financial fraud. That's why it's illegal in most states in our country, unless you partner with the state. And here's the con in action. Here's just, I think it's the best graphic I've ever seen. This is from Natasha Schulz's book, Addiction by Design. That's for how a slot machine works, but that model is true for all forms of gambling. It's true for online sports gambling. The more time you spend on the device, the more times you spend it, the more buttons you press, the longer more frequently you play it, you end up guaranteed mathematically to lose all your money. Okay, it's a con. Other examples of the big con. Okay, the big con that represents predatory gambling. You make a bet with a friend, and that's one thing. When you're betting against a sports book, you're going to get beat almost all the time. And this is a quote from an prominent ESPN reporter, where he was interviewed in an Ohio newspaper, and this is his exact quote. There was a study of the accounts of a major bookmaker. Out of 500,000 accounts, only 50 of the accounts, 50 individuals, were found to be profitable. I mean, that's what we're talking about. It's a con. It's a fraud. If you are one of the if you're one of the very rare people though, who's actually good at this, you got the algorithms, you know how to track the weather, all the injury reports, and you're eking out, you're beating these guys little by little. The bookmakers, they shut you out. ESPN's reported this, the Washington Post reported, they'll close your account or restrict your ability to bet. So even if you win, they shut you down. So a lot of the arguments that you're going to prevent illegal gambling, they're doing it anyways, was touched on. Again, these numbers aren't coming from the Georgia Bureau of Investigations or the FBI. This was a specific PR campaign by the American Gambling Association, as the New York Times revealed in its a big study, investigative series on sports gambling in November, that this was a coordinated, orchestrated PR campaign that they've used state by state to create quote unquote momentum for sports gambling, because there's no other rationale for it.
Number 5, our new committee's walking in the door.
What's that?
Hit number 5 because the new committee is walking in the door.
Got it. All right. And also the last thing on that,
All right.
the distinguished members of a Hall of Fame, if you want to go to our homepage of our website, one thing that's consistent across this is gambling operators, governors, legislators, and so on who push gambling. Most of them themselves don't gamble. The last thing I'll say on this is fact number 5 is you pay even if you don't play. For all those folks who think you're benefiting from this, in the long term, this is the best report in the country around government gambling revenues. That's, it shows it's a loser as a revenue source. That's the reality of it. So in closing, the last thing I'd say is those are all the facts summarized. At the end of the day, we've known these facts for 20 years. If we talk about need more research, we've known the facts about this for 20 years, and there's nothing really new here. What's driven this process in Georgia and across our country is 2 things. It's driven by greed and a lust for power. That's why commercialized gambling is in the space here. There's no grassroots movement for this. That's why there's 80 gambling lobbyists registered in the state of Georgia. So they spend millions of dollars for this business. So I appreciate the opportunity to testify today, and I'll stick around if there's any questions. Thanks for your work.
We do appreciate you being here, and I would like it if you would stick around. We have your slide presentation in our folders, but I need to get a little additional
Thank you.
information from
You got it.
All right, folks, we're running out of time here. What is the pleasure of the committee? And we are going to run out of town too. We're off tomorrow. What's the pleasure of committee on SR 140?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we
Move past. And that would be to committee substitute. That's LC 550047S. All right. Is there a second? Yeah, second and a third. Any discussion or any proposed amendments on this constitutional amendment, Senate Resolution 140? All right, all in favor, raise your hand. And all opposed, same sign. It passes, and we will be back on Tuesday. On Tuesday, we're going to take up Senate Bill 172, which is the enabling legislation. And we will have an agenda out Monday. We'll have several other bills on for Tuesday. It's 4 o'clock. Get my times mixed up. What time do we meet Tuesday? 4. Yeah. Yeah, I did. 6.
It's okay.
All right. We will stand adjourned and see everybody on Tuesday at 4 o'clock.